In the summer of 1967, the best-dressed man in the room was quietly terrified. Brian Epstein had discovered the Beatles, shaped them, and made them the biggest act on Earth. And yet, by his own private reckoning, he was running out of time. His management contract with the band was due to expire that October. 5 years of work, and on paper, he had no guaranteed hold on their future at all. The mastermind the world saw was, in his own quiet fear, a disposable employee, a man who could simply not be rehired. This is the story of the Fifth Beatle, who in his final months became convinced the 4 men he loved most were about to leave him behind. To understand the fear, you have to understand the paper. Epstein's company, NEMS, took a full 25% of the Beatles' earnings, but that arrangement was tied to a contract with an end date. When it came up for renewal that autumn, the terms on the table were brutal. His cut would be slashed from 25% to 10%, and NEMS would lose its share of their performance money altogether. There was no clause that bound the richest band in the world to him on the old terms, only a renegotiation that spelled out in plain figures how much less he was now worth to them. For a man whose entire identity was wrapped up in being their manager, that was a quiet catastrophe. Publicly, he was the architect of the most famous career in music. Privately, by several accounts, he lay awake doing the arithmetic of his own irrelevance. The screaming crowds had been his proof that he mattered. Now the screaming had stopped, and the maths was no longer in his favor. The trouble had really begun the moment the touring ended. For years, Brian's job had been concrete: the bookings, the tours, the deals, the schedule. But in August 1966, the Beatles walked off a stage for the last time and disappeared into the studio. And inside Abbey Road, there was nothing for a business manager to do. They no longer needed someone to fill a stadium. They needed engineers, not an agent. Day after day, the men he had guided were inventing a new kind of music in a room he had no part in. He could sign the checks, but he could not touch the work. The closer they got to their art, it is hard not to think the further they drifted from the anxious man in the tailored suit waiting by the phone. And then, that August, they found a new kind of guide. The Beatles became followers of the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, the teacher of transcendental meditation. For the first time, the 4 of them were looking to someone else entirely for direction, not their manager, but a guru in white robes. To those around Brian, the symbolism was brutal. The men who had once needed him for everything were now seeking answers he could not give in a language he did not speak. He had handled their money, their image, their every public move. But he could not meditate their doubts away, and he could not follow them onto that path. By several accounts, he felt it as exactly what it looked like: a replacement. The guidance had moved on, and it had not taken him with it. And the warning signs had been there since the start of the year. Back in January 1967, Epstein had brought the Australian impresario Robert Stigwood into NEMS, handing him a share of the company with an option that could one day let Stigwood take it over entirely. It was the move of a man already looking for the exit, already sensing he could not carry it all alone. But the Beatles could not stand Stigwood. Lennon's verdict was blunt: "We don't know you. Why would we do this?" They flatly refused to be handed to him. What Brian had meant as shoring up his future, the band read as a stranger reaching for the wheel. It is not hard to see how he took it personally. One more sign that his judgment was no longer trusted, that the empire he built was slipping toward harder, younger men he could not control. You can see the distance most clearly in what happened next. That autumn, the Beatles began making Magical Mystery Tour, a film they wrote, directed, and ran almost entirely themselves. The manager who had once approved every move was this time barely consulted. Picture the irony.
Brian Epstein, who had stage-managed the rise of Sgt. Pepper, the most celebrated album in the world, now standing outside the door while the boys built the next thing without him. They were already drawing up the plans that would become Apple Corps, their own company, their own empire, their own rules. And the quiet, devastating truth of those final weeks, as several who knew him recalled, was simple. The four men he had given his life to no longer thought to ask him for permission. They just went ahead. On the 27th of August 1967, while the Beatles were in Wales with the Maharishi, Brian Epstein was found dead at his London home. The inquest ruled it an accidental overdose of prescription drugs, a careless, cumulative dose, not a verdict of intent. He was 32 years old. He never lived to face the moment he had spent his last months dreading, the cold renegotiation, the slashed percentage, the quiet signal that he was no longer the man they could not do without. By every account of that summer, he was braced to be cast aside. In a dark way, his death spared him from it. But here is the cruelest part. Almost everything he had feared came true the moment he was gone. Without him, the Beatles' business collapsed into chaos. The failure of Apple, the bitter war between managers, the lawsuits that would help tear the band apart. The paranoia of his final summer was, in the end, simply proof of how clearly he had seen it coming. The Fifth Beatle died a stranger to the four, convinced, at the last, that he had already been left behind.